Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of PDA Dad UK, and in this week's episode I am talking to the fabulous Mary Cole. Mary, how are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
I am very well. Getting into the silly season now.
Oh indeed, silly season is the word, yes.
It really is, especially when you've got extra needs kids.
So true, yes.
So to explain, Mary is actually my cousin, and she has an amazing son by the name of Ben who was born Downs. Mary, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so Ben has Down syndrome. He's 13 years old. He's our middle child. We have a daughter who's 18 and a younger son who's 11. Ben has Down syndrome, and we didn't know about this until he was born. So at the time, that was a big shock. But, you know, it's just opened a whole new world to us. I didn't know anyone with Down syndrome when Ben was born, so that was partly what the shock was about. It was not that I thought it was terrible or anything like that. It was just, I literally didn't know what the future held for us. But now I know. Wow. It's very, very good.
Well, I mean, Ben's an amazing kid. Yes. What's day-to-day life like with Ben?
Often very funny. You have to kind of take the attitude of what will be, because sometimes it's unpredictable. Day-to-day life with Ben, I mean, in many ways, he's a very typical teenager. You know, he's grumpy and, you know, he's fussy about his appearance, and he, you know, doesn't want to go to bed and loves computer games. And all, you know, he's very, very typical. In other ways, it's very, very different. I think you get to learn how you need to kind of plan. You know, always have a backup plan, I think, is my watchword for dealing with our day-to-day life. And if things don't go according to plan, you just got to kind of rethink it and say, oh, well, you know, tomorrow's another day.
When I spend time with Ben, it's always amazed me just what a joyful, happy chap he is.
Yeah. He has amazing capacity for joy. I mean, it is something. I mean, as with anything, there are stereotypes, and one of these stereotypes about people with Down syndrome is that they're always happy, which I can assure you, as a teenager, he is not always happy. We actually have a grumpometer. So, and it's like the scale of a an earthquake. So it's a logarithmic scale. So the gap between 7 and 8 is way bigger than the gap between 5 and 6, for example. So we have a level 9 day. But I mean, actually, on a serious note, it's a bit of a joke, but it's also a way of helping him. You know, we say to Ben, "Are you a level 9 grump today?" And it's a way of helping him understand that, you know, it's okay not to be okay, in a way that he can access. So it's quite good, really.
It's actually one of those things that could be useful. I mean, for a neurotypical or a normally able kid, the same sort of thing would actually be very useful.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of
for some adults as well. My wife reliably informs me I'm quite grumpy at times. I should maybe have a hat with a dial on it that I can.
Let's patent it. We should do it.
Something like the PEX cards that you can just flip for red.
Yeah.
Stay away. What are the challenges from the early stages and the early days? What challenges did you really face once you realised, obviously, he was Downs, and how did that progress?
I think one thing we were thrown into right away is we have a lot of appointments. And actually, managing a hospital visit with a child with additional needs is not straightforward. There's a lot to think about, and so we were thrown straight away into that. I think one of the things I find hardest from a care point of view, it's not Ben's needs, it's not Ben at all, it's the amount of form filling I have to do. The administration, you have to turn into a kind of whiz administrator.
You do, don't you? I hadn't ever actually sort of thought about it from that perspective, but it is unbelievable the amount of paperwork that comes with send kids.
The thing that really gets me is when you have to repeat the same information over and over again. It's a lifelong thing. Certain things change, yes. Certain things do not.
It's just always going to be there.
But it's interesting, though. I mean, Ben's just recently joined the most amazing dance group called Project 21. And it's a dance group specifically for people with Down syndrome. And it's based on the premise that it's really important to recognise and understand the needs of people with Down syndrome and then create a space for them accordingly in which they're going to thrive. Yeah. And he attended a taster session before the second lockdown and emailed over this huge wad of forms to fill in. And my heart sank a little bit. And then I read the questions and I thought, wow, they are asking all the right questions.
That makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it?
They really showed that they understood the needs of a person with Down syndrome. And that's not all, sadly, it's not always the case. I'm afraid our society is not completely geared up for people with learning disabilities. And, you know, this year of all years, we have really experienced that in a big, big way.
Well, it's really come to the fore, hasn't it, with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, and just how much this stuff needs to be addressed. And it's really interesting in this little perspective that on my other channel with the Grumpy Dads that I do with Chris, we talk about it a lot, that it would be really good to see a module or an ongoing thing about sort of educating the general population on disability and how to make it work. Because there's absolutely no reason our society can't be adapted and suited with some very simple, and it comes down to understandings. Kids aren't born with a fear, you know what I mean? Like, you look at kids at a young age, there's it doesn't matter how someone looks, it doesn't matter how they present, there's just understanding. It's something that we seem to instill over time, and I think if we were in the schools doing this sort of educating that everybody's human, everybody's got their place, exactly, it would become, it wouldn't be an issue. It's something that we can eradicate. Is that something you find? That it's something I come across a lot. It's the biggest hurdle. Who was I was talking to? It was Liz Wright, who we got an episode coming up on the Grumpy Dads that we did with her. She's a Paralympic medalist. Okay. And she was saying the biggest hurdle that she faces isn't accessibility. That's a hurdle that's there, but it's not the biggest, you know. It's not being able to get out and about. It's not being able to live life daily. It's actually the attitudes that come from other people and the looks or the, how do you find that? Is that something that you come across a lot?
Actually, the staring issue, it's something we are up against. And I try to keep an open mind about this, because I can remember, it's quite poignant actually, because it was the last outing I had with my parents, with Ben when he was a baby. We went to a National Trust place in the Lake District, near where they lived. And there was another family there, and the same profile of our family at the time. So there was an older girl, younger son, and the son has Down syndrome. And I put my hands up, I stared. And because Ben was just, weeks old, really, and I was still processing all the what does it mean for us. And there was this family, the boy was probably about 5 and the girl was probably about 8. And they were just having such a relaxed, fun, happy time. And I know I was staring at them because I was looking at them thinking, that's going to be us. It's going to be okay. So when, people do stare, and I try to keep that in mind, that it might be that they're staring because, look at that strange child. It might be that. But the other side of the coin is it might be something completely other. I don't know. And actually, I think it is interesting. One of the things I do find hardest personally is you have to constantly be dealing with other people's attitudes towards Ben. Constantly. And that can be really hard. There was on one of the parent groups I'm on Facebook, there was a question a few months ago. I think it was actually during lockdown, and it made me really think. The question was about people working with your child. It wasn't the general populace. Yeah. The general populace, if you've not, I'd never met a person with Down syndrome. I work in education. I'd never met a person with Down syndrome when Ben was born. So, it does help to keep in mind that some people maybe say something really thoughtless or stare or whatever because they just don't know. Where it's people working with my child, not necessarily directly, but I've had some really sort of jaw-dropping, oh, bless them, they all look the same, don't they?
And it's so far from the truth.
Well, exactly. It's just and that from a person who in theory has had training. Doesn't work directly with my son, but anyway, it shocked me that. Yeah,
that's the kind of thing that just sort of lumps it all. If you said that, in a racial perspective, you'd be locked up these days.
All the time. If you substitute in race for disability discrimination,
how did you respond at the time?
I just walked, because the thing that was so shocking about it was said in front of Ben. So I just kind of whisked him away quick and got in the car and blubbed. I mean, these things happen, and I never have the right comeback at the time. Like, I wish, when, somebody in my village who I don't know very well phoned up to say how sorry they were when Ben was born. I mean, that's quite a common one for people with Down syndrome families. I hear that quite a lot. There's even actually a wonderful, someone who has a page called Don't Be Sorry, and she does wonderful advocacy. She's got a little boy with Down syndrome, younger than Ben. And I wish I'd had the comeback at the time. Why? What did you do? What are you sorry for? I never have the quick comeback.
So often in life, isn't it? You're sitting there an hour later going, I should have said this. What was family reaction like when Ben was born?
Yeah, good, actually. I think Jason's parents were staying with us at the time, and they were incredibly supportive. I think we were all in a state of shock, to be honest with you. And it's so sad. I mean, it's been very much thrown into the limelight at the moment with this storyline that's running with Emmerdale. It's a very common reaction for someone who to be faced with a diagnosis of Down syndrome, whether it's prenatal or postnatal, as ours was, that you experience this shock.
The mourning period, isn't there? I was talking to somebody about this recently as well. It's almost like you have to be allowed to go through that.
I think, and actually, I think it doesn't say anything about your relationship with your child. It's just a fact of life that your life is not going to be the same as you thought it was going to be. Yeah. Pre that diagnosis, and it's just a healthy reaction to readjust and take some time to refocus on that. I
think it's important. I think you've got to allow yourself that and not feel the guilt that comes with it sometimes. No. We had similar with my daughter, obviously, with Sienna as she was born, and obviously we didn't find out that there was a neurodiverse element to her being until much later on. But when you sort of become faced with that, you do go, we went through the same thing. You sort of realize this is how it's going to be. This isn't something that we can shift or change. You've got to adapt your life, and you do need to be able to allow yourself that time to process it sort of. And mourn's a strong word, but you do need to sort of put to rest what the expectations were to be able to move on to setting the new ones and adapting your life, don't you?
I think also there's an element of, I think there are certain things that we have in common in terms of autism as a condition and Down syndrome as a condition.
Yeah.
But there's also some very significant differences, and you've either got that extra chromosome or you haven't, and the diagnosis is actually a relatively simple thing. I'm very painfully aware of how not simple the diagnosis journey can be for people with autism.
So am I. Aside from those sort of challenging side of things, you've made some adaptations. You've become much more active in the community as an advocate and a voice. How's that come about, and what is it that you do?
Well, on a very local level, I have a Facebook page. It's not specifically for parents of children with Down syndrome. A local Facebook page for people to share ideas and share events, and sometimes actually meet up for coffee. I have a little bit of I don't have a sort of actual page or blog or anything like that. I've done quite a bit of guest blogging, and I've done some magazine articles.
You've written some amazing articles on all this stuff.
Thank you very much. That's kind.
You have a way of writing that makes it very present, if that makes sense. You feel what you're experiencing through your words, which is a gift.
I think actually the writing has helped me enormously. It's helped me process what I'm dealing with. It's helped me celebrate many aspects of it, actually, because although, going back to this how sorry we are, it's not an awful life at all. It's a very rich life. And you've mentioned community several times. The Down syndrome community is phenomenal. I mean, really, what a community to be part of.
It's true. It's something. I've talked about this on my other channel with Chris a lot, and we talked about there is an amazing community out there, and you don't know it exists until you're sort of thrust into the need to. Yeah. In that way. And it is, we were talking about it actually just on a recent episode, and you got this, it's almost like walking into a bit like a cult. Yes. Everyone's like, one of us. And then, exactly. And then suddenly you're like, well, who are these people? But they seem to like me. So,
And it is wonderful having that community that you can just vent if you need to, or share your frustrations, or, as I say, celebrate the good points. And yeah.
I think that's true. And I think that's a side of it. For all the understanding in the world and how much good it would do with having that in education, I think unless you've experienced it, you just can't understand it. And you never will. There's a difference between being able to empathise and sympathise.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
And it is one of those things, until you've experienced it, and then you find these people who have also been in the same boat, and then suddenly it's so helpful to know that, I think, number one, you're not alone. I don't know about you. My experience was it was very isolating at first.
Yeah.
And you feel that sort of that pressure, I guess, because you feel alone. And then you suddenly find a group of people that understand from the inside, and it takes away that separation from society that you can kind of feel. And it's a rich part of life, funnily enough. That's what I was surprised by.
It's hugely rich, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we're such a diverse community. I've met people, I'm in contact with people all over the world that I never would have made contact with through this. Yeah,
it opens up so many doors to a much more interesting world as well. I think it's almost like a kind of Harry Potterish. There's this whole sort of world that exists behind a door somewhere, or Narnia or whatever. But it is a bit like that sort of. It exists in the background that you're not really aware of until you just open that door one day and suddenly they're all there waiting to welcome you. It's a rich, beautiful thing. How's Ben going with how's the teenage thing going? Because that must be an interesting time. I know we're facing it with my daughter at the moment with the onset of puberty. It's something with autistic people. They often have an early onset of puberty, and we're experiencing that in droves at the moment. Okay. How's that been for you?
It's actually quite common in the Down syndrome community as well. It's quite common to have early onset puberty. Yeah. One of the things that's difficult for Ben is he does have quite complex communication needs. And it's something we're working with his school at the moment to try and kind of help him.
That's a really interesting thing I'd like to answer as well, because you've got Ben in mainstream, haven't you?
He's in mainstream school, yes, that's right.
How's that come about? I think it's a wonderful thing.
I mean, that was the thing. I mean, before Ben was born, I was actually a secondary mainstream teacher, and I'd never, I'd worked with students with, all sorts of disabilities, but never Down syndrome. And one of the things, in all the fog of the things they said to us when they delivered the diagnosis when he was 3 days old, one of the things that stuck in my mind was they go to mainstream school now, which is not blanketly true, actually. But I hadn't it wasn't really on my radar that this was possible. And I'm very much not, it must be mainstream at all costs, but it is working for him.
I think that's the key, isn't it? Yeah, because obviously Sienna's not in mainstream because she just couldn't exist in that thing. But I love that. For me, there's a twofold sort of side to it. I love that he's able to do that.
We have been extraordinarily fortunate in it has to be the right mainstream setting, because his needs are extremely complex.
Yeah, but how good for those kids as well, that they get to know Ben as Ben.
Yes. He's not a syndrome to them, he's a person.
He's got such an individual character.
Yeah.
And I especially love watching him with his grandfather.
Yes.
That relationship.
They have an incredible relationship, don't they? Yeah.
It's the purest form of love I've seen.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's both ways.
Yes,
and it's just a beautiful thing to see. What sort of difference can family make in your setting? Because I know from our setting and talking to people who have autistic kids a lot, you get that sort of family. It's a bit different in a sense, but I guess because autism can be more hidden, it can be hard for family to accept.
Yes.
But for you, what difference does family support and acceptance make?
Oh, huge, absolutely huge. Very much on a practical level. So it's things like, my sister, Jason's parents have come to stay sometimes so we can have like a night out or an evening away. So it gives us some respite. And also all the practical knowing that they would drop everything if Ben had to go into hospital or something like that to help out the rest of the family. Talking about my parents who were still alive when Ben was born, they were just so completely accepting.
Yeah.
Totally. And my mother was a paediatric nurse at the time when outcomes for people with Down syndrome were not good, really not good. If Ben was born in the year I was born, his life expectancy would be about 25. It's up sort of high 60s now, I think, for people with Down syndrome.
Wow, that's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, I can remember actually. I mean, I think I've told you this before, that I didn't know anyone with Down syndrome, but there was this episode of Inspector Frost on television, made in the 90s, groundbreaking at its time, and it had a storyline involving young people with Down syndrome, quite a grim storyline, I have to say. But I can remember that, watching that with my parents and having a conversation with my mum, who was, as I say, worked in paediatrics, and she was incredibly positive about people with Down syndrome, and that stuck with me, and that I kind of held that, you know, in my heart, if you like, because I know that they didn't see Ben very much because they got quite unwell and they live hundreds of miles from us, so they didn't really see a great deal of Ben. But I know that they were totally unfazed by his disability. They just saw Ben.
You've mentioned, obviously there, Frost, and you mentioned before the whole, I'm going to go there, with the Emmerdale storyline. I'd love to hear your response to that and what your thoughts have been.
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't watch it, and I haven't watched it partly because I don't want to be there boosting their ratings, because I think that they didn't really seem to have thought this very well through. They didn't research it as thoroughly as they could have done. It was quite a lazy storyline, I think. You know, I find it actually quite difficult talking about the prenatal testing thing, because people get, you know, this sort of red mist descends and people can't kind of, to me, it's a disability rights thing. I'm totally pro-choice. But it's not a choice if people are presented with outdated information about what Down syndrome is and what it involves. So I think that's really important to put out there. Also, there's another campaign that's going on at the moment that it is legal to terminate a child with Down syndrome up until 40 weeks. And again, that's going back to legislation from the late 1960s about what was severe disability. I don't know how it's exactly worded, but it's the point is that Down syndrome is not incompatible with life. People with Down syndrome don't suffer. I mean, yes, they have challenges in life. They may have more medical issues. You know, they don't suffer with Down syndrome. There are surveys to prove that people with Down syndrome who can access the questions are incredibly happy with their lives. And also, another thing that's thrown out there is that, oh, it's a terrible burden for the family. It really isn't. The wonderful Sally Phillips, who has a son with Down syndrome, has described it. I love her words. She said it's vanishingly rare for people with a child with Down syndrome to not accept it as an absolute joy and delight.
What's it been like for your other two kids growing up with Ben? How's it enriched them?
They both of them have the most incredible relationship, very different relationships with Ben, actually. Joshua and Ben, they're quite close in age. There's 21 months between them. So no accident that the sign for brother is that. You know, they rub each other up. As siblings do.
That's why I had no idea.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And Jenny and Ben, they have, and it very much works both ways. Jenny is in sixth form. She's had an incredibly disrupted time in sixth form because of the pandemic and other things going on. And often the one person that can help Jenny if she's having a difficult day is Ben. They just have this kind of, I mean, it's a little bit like the relationship Chris and Ben have. Ben has with his granddad. It's just kind of on that level. They are so in tune with each other.
That's beautiful. Magic.
But at the same time, Joshua, I mean, lots of people comment about how kind Joshua is. And I mean, I'd like to think he would be, even if Ben wasn't his sibling, I'm sure he would be. He's just a lovely natured boy. But, you know, I mean, like the other day, they were talking in his form tutor group about young carers, and he got up and spoke to his form about what it's like to be Ben's brother. I'm so proud of him for that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 7-year-old boy, not 7-year-old, he's in year 7. That's a big thing to do. So, I mean, it's interesting because it's the first time in 5 years that they've been in the same school together, and so far it's been okay. We haven't,
That's great.
It was a bit of an unknown quantity as to how that would pan out, but it's been fine.
What would be your piece of advice if somebody was to ask you if they were experiencing something, they've had the prenatal or their postnatal and discovered that, I don't think even for just Downs, but there is a physical disability or even a learning disability that's accompanied it. What would your advice be to parents who are experiencing this and going through this at this point?
I think the first thing I'd say is just avoid Dr. Google. If you Google Down syndrome, you get all this grim, may never walk, may never talk rubbish, and it's just rubbish. You know, it's true for some people with Down syndrome, but it's not. worst case scenario is not helpful. I'd say there's a lot of stuff on social media about the Down syndrome community. Seek that out. Seek it out from people who actually know.
I completely agree with that. It's
that will
advice
paint a picture that is so different from what you'll find.
It's advice I give about autism. If you
Yes.
actually speak to people who are themselves autistic,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
so much more enlightening, and I'm able to help my daughter so much more and support her so much more because I've been able to engage with other autistic people who can give me actual feedback and in things that are quite scary in some cases.
Yeah.
So my daughter hears voices, and that was petrifying for me at first. It was like, whoa, we're hitting some really dark stuff here. But after speaking to a few autistic people, it was like, oh yeah, we get that. It's quite common. It's just not widely known or talked about. Such a relief to know that this is part of autism and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you've got to be able to work with it and work with it. It made such a difference to me to be able to do that. So reaching out to people who've been there, other parents, and like you say, Downs people themselves who can talk about this sort of stuff and help.
Can I just pick you up on one thing here, because I know people in the Down syndrome community will pick up on this, and it's a funny one because it's opposite to what it is in the autistic community. Yeah. We refer to people with Down syndrome.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know it's you know, if you don't know that, why would you know that? But it's and I've thought quite a lot about this because, as I say, in the autistic, the autistic
community is something I learned from the autistic community themselves was that they generally prefer to be known as they are autistic.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's really valuable information for me because it means it's a mistake I won't make again.
Sorry, I'm not criticising. It's just I know there will be people from the Down syndrome community watching this, and it does. Language is powerful, and I think it's interesting because I think there's this whole notion of autistic pride, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that goes with the use of the language. And I think, sadly, we're still at the stage with Down syndrome that people can't see beyond the disability. They see the disability.
Absolutely.
No, it's just not the person behind.
And it's a part of them, not the sum of them in a way. And I think from the autistic community, this is who we are. Yeah. And that understanding needs to be there. But for someone with Downs, it's a part of them. And
exactly.
Going back to the Emmerdale thing, I really want to hear your personal response to that and how it's affected you and what your real thoughts are.
Okay, well, just rewind a little bit to the thought that when Ben was born. Okay, he's 13 now, and there's a lot more on social media than there was at the time. But I had access to a TV show I'd seen with people with Down syndrome featuring in the story, and some outdated leaflets. So it was incredibly important and powerful. That TV show, that was really all I had to go on. Television is so powerful. Earlier in the year during lockdown, I binge watched the whole lot of The A Word. Now, not maybe a perfect representation of a family with a child, with an autistic child, but wonderful program to me because they have adult characters with Down syndrome who are married, they have a job, they live independently with some support. Actually, there's going to be a spin-off series about this couple, and just wow. I mean, there's been nothing on television like that. There's so little on television to do with learning disabilities. There's a program, There She Goes. I don't know if you've seen that one. No, it's an interesting watch. I mean, I'm a little bit curate's egg about it, but it's written from life. It's a family that have a child with quite a severe learning disability, and it's reflecting their experiences. I think all the soaps do have a character with Down syndrome in now. It's quite a common thing. But
yes.
But the whole thing about The A Word that took it onto another level for me, as I say, was this really, really positive message that this is how life can be if you've got Down syndrome.
There's this. I had went to a really good seminar years and years ago. It was when I lived in Australia, and it was with a guy who was the editor of a newspaper. And he got very real, and he actually said that, what do you think my job is as the editor of a paper? And people were there, well, to ensure that it's unbiased, to ensure that it's factual, to ensure he goes, yeah. You know what? None of that matters. My job as an editor is to sell newspapers. And if I can put something on the front page that is going to make people buy that newspaper from the newsstand on the way to work, I'm going to put it there. it really hit me. Like, I was so glad that he was really honest about it, but it really is the case that these things get sensationalized. So storyline like what they're doing Emmerdale at the moment, it's done for sensationalization. And I hate this representation that soaps are somehow supposed to reflect real life. If I lived in EastEnders, I think I'd have been a statistic for something a long time ago, because it's just I'd be depressed beyond depression if I had to live in that street.
Yeah, but I do think, though, quite seriously, I do think that the soap operas, shows like EastEnders, can be a really, really positive power for good.
Yes,
they can. The thing that concerns about the Emmerdale storyline is I don't think it helps anybody.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. They make these things, they're sensationalized, and so to make them sensational and something that people will tune into, because ultimately it comes back to ratings.
It's not going to help anyone make an informed decision about a prenatal diagnosis.
That's it.
Okay.
And all it's going to do is present a worst case scenario, isn't it?
And they keep rolling out this excuse that, we have a character with Down syndrome, but it's like saying, I'm not racist because I know a black person. It's kind of... There's one thing about this whole prenatal screening thing that really does bother me, and it's not aired very often, is the word, the phrase existential crisis is bandied about quite a lot in our world at the moment, but it really is that for the Down syndrome community. If you go to certain countries, I mean, Denmark actually has a policy of trying to eradicate Down syndrome from, I think it's 2030. They don't want to have any more live births of people with Down syndrome with their screening program. God. And it's not as, it's not kind of enshrined in law in this country, but they've rolled out the NIPIT program, and the abortion rate is very, very high. It's over 90%. And as I say, you've got to examine the reasons behind that, and a lot of it's to do with societal attitudes towards Down syndrome. It's very hard to get balanced information out there, and that's what's required. But the other thing that bothers me is I think our community is not going to grow because of that. We're going to get small. I mean, I don't know if it will happen. I'm not objecting to prenatal screening. We were screened because, not that I don't know if I'd known. In all honesty, I don't know what I would have done. It is helpful to know one way or another. I do have a problem with people being then, there's a lot of evidence on enormous pressure put on mothers to terminate once the diagnosis has been there. And in fact, when I was expecting Joshua, we had this interesting thing. I had CVS testing because I wanted to know either way. I didn't want to be with a probability, because Ben actually had quite a low probability of having Down syndrome. Yeah. So that kind of added to the shock because it was so unexpected. Our GP had been marvellous when Ben was born. She came and visited us at the house half a dozen times. I didn't think GPs actually did house visits anymore, but she was enormously supportive. And then when I was pregnant with Joshua and we were sorting out the CVS testing, she said, we'll get this sorted out, and if it's positive, we'll book you in for the termination. That was her exact words. No kind of, and then we'll discuss it and what your options are. It was, we'll book you in for the termination, that's that, because that's the only possible thing you could want. Emmerdale can show anything. It would be great if they could show the reality of that, of mothers being phoned sort of 20 times saying, are you sure you don't want a termination? Because that's the reality of what people are facing if they have a prenatal diagnosis. There is some really good practice out there. There is training for healthcare professionals about delivering a diagnosis, in a way that's compassionate, because I know plenty of people who've had that diagnosis delivered in a way that is appalling. I mean, it wasn't particularly good or particularly bad when we were told, but it certainly wasn't delivered as good news. It was delivered as, something negative. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? I liken it to X-Men. The original X-Men movie and the sequel. And this whole idea that I just remember one particular scene where the kid, he's a mutant and he's talking to his mum. She's learning about this for the first time. And her response is, can't you just try not being a mutant?
Have you tried not being a mutant?
And it's this thing of how much do we suppress from our exactly. How much do we suppress from our society because we're so unwilling to make adaptions.
And the damage, the profound damage to autistic people.
Hugely for autistic people. It's one. I mean, because it is for autism, it's very much like that sort of, it's a hidden thing, and unless you sprouted wings, you weren't going to know that person's a mutant. But it, you know, there's a very hidden element to it, and until it comes out in challenging behaviours and things like stimming and things that you need to do to regulate. And there's so much. When you go back through history and look at how many amazing autistic people, I mean, even taking autism out, you look at someone, you know, like Einstein was likely autistic. He was never diagnosed, but posthumous diagnosis. And you've got Stephen Hawkins, but severely disabled. If he'd have been, he'd have likely been terminated if you'd known that was going to be his existence.
But it's an interesting.
And yet, one of the greatest minds in history would have been.
But actually, you raised something very interesting there. There's quite a movement at the moment to just celebrate and value the lives of all our community, because, you know, okay, there are autistic people who are profoundly brilliant, like the Einsteins of the world, but there are autistic people who, you know, won't ever speak, won't ever work, and their lives are to be celebrated and valued just the same. And that, you know, and we have the same because we have, you know, within the Down syndrome community, you know, you probably see these things on Facebook, and someone's become a hairdresser or someone's become a scaffolder who has Down syndrome, and it's news. It is thought around 5% of people with learning disabilities have paid employment. 5%. So it is news, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't news. I mean, I love these stories and I hate them because I wish it wasn't a big deal.
You wish it wasn't newsworthy.
I wish it wasn't newsworthy, And you hear about the people with Down syndrome who act in Hamlet or something, but the person with Down syndrome who is 24 and still wearing pads, their life is to be celebrated as much. You know what I mean?
It's so true. It's just because it came out of the whole Black Lives Matter side of things, and there's the Twitter hashtag, which is All Lives Matter, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
But also, the Black Lives Matter thing, the thing that really hit home for me, it was very much focused in America, and America has a lot of legislation in place to protect people of different races, and still their society is so unequal.
Absolutely.
So do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
So and we're way behind, I think, with disability rights in terms of enshrined rights in law. You know, even the Black Lives Matter thing just throws a light on the fact that even with those rights enshrined in law, you know, life is not a level playing field. And I think if we can take one thing from it, is that if we are living in a community which is diminishing in size because of the abortion rates going up and up and up, this is not mentioned a great deal, but it concerns me as someone who works in education as well, is I fear that it will lead to a diminution of services, of research into education, the educational needs of people with Down syndrome. And I think that needs shouting from the rooftops. I fear that for our community.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, goodness knows there's little enough out there for autistic people who are 1 in 67 of the population, something like that. At the moment, about 1 in 1,000 people in the UK have Down syndrome. And if that gets to, you know, what's the situation going to be if we get to 1 in 2,000, 1 in 4,000, 1 in 5,000? What services and provision and research is going to be there for people with Down syndrome? And that concerns me greatly.
Mary, I want to thank you. It's been fantastic talking to you. And would love to do this again. And,
yes, we must. I'd love that.
Talk further. It'd be amazing.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and a huge thank you to Mary. If you're interested in any more of Mary's work, please do check out the links that are in the description for this video. Please do like this. Please do comment. I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think of the Emmerdale episode and if it's had an impact on you personally. Please do subscribe. It makes a huge difference to who gets to see this video just by the amount of subscribers there are on there. Have a really safe school holidays, and I will talk to you guys again next time.